steroids do turn on satellite cell activity. So the idea would be that one of the unethical advantages, when the advantage you'd have from previous steroid use is that you have accrued more satellite cells, and you have a muscle memory phenomenon, or potentially even because those tend to stick around for years. Once you have them, they stay. Seems. So that, even if you've been off for years, you accrued a supraphysiological number of satellite cells.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming, it's brought to you by BYOBBcoach.com. That's Scott's book. You can get Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. The hardcover edition is available, signed by Scott. We'll have the link below, and 15% goes to the ASPCA. And we are brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there for high-quality third-party tested supplements. They're the first company that's ever advertised with our programming. Great stuff over there. Let me know if you have any questions. SupplementSource.ca for our Canadians. Great deals that change week to week. We've got some Patreon questions today. Thank you guys for everybody who helps to support the programming on Patreon. And I think that's it. That's it. What's up, man?
Great questions today. I think we added them up because last week I had my 2025 thing, the alphabetical, whatever.
That was fun.
That was cool, yeah. And now we got some really good questions. It's kind of all over the place, but good. I like it when the questions, either they're well formulated, so you have all the parameters to give a good answer, or they've got enough particular variables that are involved that it gives me time to ramble, and I can say all sorts of shit that hopefully is interesting to people.
I like it. I see we have one in the live stream. We'll make sure to jump to that too. And anybody else who's got questions, feel free to post them up. For people watching this live, this will obviously be the next episode of Muscle Minds coming out on audio podcast and on the main YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. Sometimes they're like, oh man, the live stream looks choppy today. Just a heads up, if it does get choppy, the finished edited version is going to be clean and perfect. So hang for that. How about what about this one? I like this question, Scott. I think can a person's fast twitch or slow twitch muscle fibers vary significantly within their body and cause imbalances? I am fighting with a small quad, which is weaker, but has greater muscle endurance than the larger, stronger quad. Is this imaginary, or is it possible that one side is comprised of more fast or slow twitch fibers than the other, or are these fibers more or less even in humans? And how to grow that wee little side.
Mm-hmm.
The wee little quad.
I'm looking for the question that you sent me just so I can read through it in case I missed some details. So most of the studies, there are just in the grand scheme of things, muscles in humans. There's some general trends for certain muscles to be more slow. I hate to use slow twitch and fast twitch because we don't measure twitch speed in humans. Type 1 and type 2. So here's something that's worth noting. Just without going into, I think I have a YouTube video on fiber types. That's kind of old, but I go into all the details. So we say slow twitch or red and white. Those are those characteristics are things that would be measured in animals where you can take the whole muscle out, like in the calf muscles of the plantar flexural muscles of a rat. You can take out the gastrocnemius. There's a white and a red, and it looks white or red when you pull it out because there's more or less myoglobin and more or less capillarization on one side versus the other. The soleus is like 90-95% type 2 fibers, which tend to be slow. So type 1 fibers have a certain type of myosin ATPase in them, which tends to be associated with a certain myosin heavy chain, which is something else that's can be measured, which is associated with, in animals, a certain color, so more oxidative. You can talk about oxidative glycolytic or fast oxidative glycolytic, which are in between. And then you can talk about twitch speed. So how fast the muscle develops when you send in a single electrical pulse to it, how fast it develops force and then relaxes. So there's like, you can generally, we typically sort of break things down into like 3 fiber types: 1, 2A, or 2X if you're looking at myosin. Used to be 2B, because 2B was what we found in rats, and we figured out that the humans don't have 2B in skeletal muscles. They have 2X. But when you did it's a long story, doesn't really matter, but histochemically we've been making an error in what we were assuming we saw in the lab and what that meant actually in terms of the proteins that are there. So anyway, so you do see this, but not so much in humans. So humans, soleus are going to be a little more oxidative, endurance oriented, that sort of thing. I have never seen, this doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I have never seen someone do, or a group of researchers do, a left to right comparison to see asymmetry. The presumption is, because we're mainly symmetrical, although I've mentioned this before, like a cool thing to do if you want to see that aspect of your symmetry is to take like a front double bicep of yourself, or some sort of a front shot, or a back shot too. Split it as evenly down the middle as you can, and then flip the images and make an image of yourself with 2 left sides and 2 right sides, and compare them. And you can see which side's better and how you look differently.
It's wild. You told me about that a while back, and I tried it, man, and you can really see how different each side is. You literally have like 2 different physiques.
It can be like almost like look like you're in a different weight class, or like this is, you could convince people it's like, here's what I did last year and here's what I am now. Right, a before and after picture. It's so different. So my guess in this case, and I can't pull the question up. Let me see if it's this one. But my guess is that there might be some neurological issue there, perhaps. It's people are born with congenital differences. I'm not going to call it an abnormality or a defect, but congenital differences. That's we end up you can see sometimes people, like one ear is lower than the other, or there's obvious asymmetries in their face that seem to have been there. Will you resend it to me? Thank you. Let's see.
Yeah, that was my first thought, was, is there something nerve related on that side, or is something in some way bound up, Yeah,
I mean, Jake Cutler had that issue. The one quad was, and I actually talked to him about it. He did a guest posing here in Arizona years ago, and I chatted with him like the after party. He broke his leg when he was a kid. I think it was when he broke his leg, and that leg was casted for a long time. He had issues with it, and it was immobilized for a long period of time. And ever since then, it never really grew. So, that's what he sort of attributed it to. So, you sent me the brick shithouse one.
Oh, I thought I resent you the.
Yeah. I love that question, by the way.
Yeah, we will get.
We want to do that one for sure. Anyway, so it would make sense.
Whoops,
so it's funny how this is another topic, but there's this, when you people vary to the extent to which muscles grow when you resistance train. Obviously, some people that's the primary adaptation. Some people not so much. So there's a whole wide range of potential adaptations to choose from in the way in which skeletal muscle could adapt to a stimulus that is both fatiguing and attention overload. So if you just took a muscle, left its size the same, adjusted myosin, adjusted mitochondria, adjusted the amount of enzymes involved with energy production, you could create a more endurance-oriented muscle, which is what he has on the one side, right? And that's a valid adaptation, because if you go from doing sets of 10 with 100 pounds and now you can do sets of 15, right? You could make the muscle bigger if you're not going to, but it's interesting. There was a long time ago, there was a review looking at, the question was, does resistance exercise increase mitochondrial content, right? And in some studies, you see mitochondrial dilution. So the muscle fibers get bigger and the mitochondrial content stays the same. That's going to happen when you do training that isn't very fatiguing, like what powerlifters would do. They're not doing sets of 15. They're doing sets of 10 at the most, maybe 8, 6, doubles, triples, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So anyway, so my guess is that an adaptation in that for whatever reason, there's some neurological issues going on. There's maybe a developmental issue, such that he doesn't have as many fibers in that muscle. That's one thing that differs, like men versus women too.
Okay.
So anyway, potentially at least women. Yeah, well, that's a whole other topic. Leave that to the side. But so he may have simply fewer fibers, less potential for growth, and because he's doing a lot of bilateral stuff, the adaptation in that smaller muscle has been to increase muscle endurance. And if you imagine, right, you're doing bilateral exercises, knee extension, whatever it might be, and the smaller muscle then has to work relatively harder if you're actually producing the equal amount of force, power, and everything. So that smaller muscle, then when you get to your failure rep, well, the larger muscle isn't nearly as fatigued as the smaller one. So the smaller muscle gets a stronger fatigue-related stimulus for adaptation, and then it adapts by being more fatigue resistant. Makes perfect sense. So, like, one thing that I would think how to grow that wee little side, I would think, is to shift towards and start training unilaterally. Don't even try to increase the larger side for now. It may be if you just grow along for the ride. And then maybe try training heavier with the smaller side.
Yeah.
So you shift, if my hypothesis is correct, then you'd shift the nature of the stimulus towards heavier loading, with not so much fatigue. So you could train with reps in reserve maybe, or just train with heavier loads. So instead of doing 12 to 15s, you might do 6 to 8, like unilateral stuff. And try to focus on load progression with that. And then you could, I had, my left leg was smaller for years, and I kind of brought it up by focusing on it and basically imagining almost during my sets that it was bilateral exercise, so don't do anything wonky. I was trying to stay symmetrical and driving with both legs or what have you, but it was all about training the left leg. My focus, my mind-muscle connection was on the left leg and making sure that one got obliterated during every set. That was a working set. I didn't care about the right one. It was just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah.
So that's something he could do too, and make sure that muscle then is the one that, because it could also be like, this is another, we don't know, right? This is just another way this could possibly happen. Is he may be neurologically wired. It would make sense because that one leg is bigger to rely on that more so.
Yeah.
So if you set up a force plate like on a leg press, you might see that he's pressing. The leg press moves up by itself. If he could do like those unilateral leg presses, are really cool. It's funny to watch how like one side will move up faster than the other.
Oh yeah.
Lots of, if you've used those before, like it takes a while to coordinate. And you start doing this number.
Yeah.
He could try that as well. And it could be that the one quad has gotten bigger because he's been driving with that one. That one's been what he's really been pushing with, and the other leg has just kind of been along for the ride to some degree. So it's not getting the force. So or a combination of those things. So, but I would start training unilaterally. That seems to be one way to go about it. And if you leave the one leg be, you can start doing. You could try the stretch mediated hypertrophy type of thing, do lengthened partials, or do something like a DC stretch, so extreme stretch, or do the occlusion stretches like I have in fortitude training, where you get into a stretch position and do a max contraction, and just employ everything you can, and focus on auto-regulating your leg training around that weak leg, and just let the other one be. And so you might even like do the weak leg first to make sure there's no neurological CNS related fatigue that would be limiting the weak leg when you train that 1 second. So do that leg first, train it in the way you're going to train it, go to failure, what have you, and then just match reps with the other side, even if you got more in you, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you don't. Then just leave that be. But make it all about the weak leg. That's your priority is. And the other leg's probably not going to there's no way it's going to atrophy, if you've got a reasonable training program.
Yeah.
You can maintain much more easily.
And I wish we could see pictures. I feel like, because there is some truth too that I'll have somebody tell me like, oh my God, man, I
Oh, yeah.
have this one thing and it's so imbalanced. And I look at it, I'm like, okay, yeah, so if I really look at it, yes, I can see it, but you see it way more than I see it. There's
Yeah.
that, you know. And,
The light in your bathroom's on the left side. It just
Yeah.
makes that leg look bigger. You've believed this over the years.
we're our own worst critics, you know. That's,
Yeah.
I think, part of it. And I can tell you that I had misdevelopment in my pecs. One pec was bigger than the other, and one of the things that I found was it, and somebody had said this. I can't remember who it was, but it was one of our listeners, and this was years ago. And I liked this this little the way he put this. He said, "So let's just put a number to the size, okay? Just an arbitrary number. We'll say one pec is a 3 and the other pec is a 4. Well, if you can get them both to keep growing, and one pec is a 9 and the other pec is a 10, the difference is going to be a lot smaller. You know, basically saying like the more muscle, if you can grow that other quad, even if they're as imbalanced as they are now, if they both keep growing bigger, I think that difference will look smaller, you know.
Yeah. If your legs are twigs in the first place, then make them tree trunks first, and then worry about which trunk is smaller than the other.
Yeah.
If it's an issue, you know, like Jay Cutler, you know, that for him it was an issue at the top there. But yeah, just get as big as you possibly can, and then it might come along for the ride. You maybe don't have to do anything, but those are some thoughts.
I like it.
I wouldn't guess. I'm guessing it's a biomechanical thing potentially too. Like sometimes, you know, you can have leg length discrepancies that are related to, you know, tibial length primarily versus femoral length. There's all sorts of hip imbalances you can have that just biomechanically make it such that one quad or one leg is used more so on your bilateral leg training exercises, because the one leg's longer, so you know it's the one that is going to tend to hold the force. If the one leg, I'm making this, you know, trying to exaggerate this, but one's much longer, well, the weight's going to go on this leg that's longer versus the one shorter.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, be careful with this. You don't want to hurt yourself, but you know you may have to adjust your stance too, somewhat to accommodate that. So I would first get that checked out by someone who's equipped to make a leg length discrepancy assessment, like a physical therapist.
Yeah.
You can line your hip ups right, and then see, okay, we got something going on here. I know I don't have that because my surgeon corrected that. Like he made sure when they put the hip implants in that things were balanced out. So, so that's a possibility. So it's, you know, I don't think it's fiber type, but I wouldn't be surprised if, see, here's the things, fiber types can change over time too. So this is just, you know, academic now thinking about this, but if some accommodations have happened so that he's got better endurance in that leg, that may mean that he's got more mitochondria, that he's got a different myosin heavy chain distribution, because it's not just like one fiber type, another fiber type, or another type. If you look at the myosin heavy chains, you can have a blend. It's not like gears, like if you got a 5-speed car, it's like you've got fiber types that can be across the spectrum, and there can be all sorts of mixtures. People don't think of it that way. It's much easier to compartmentalize thing. You know, he's on my team, he's on their team. You know, he's tall, he's short. It's like, nah, you can be, you know, everything in between when it comes to muscle fibers. So there's probably some differences there, and that's why he's thinking fiber types.
Yeah.
Whether it's inborn or it's possible. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking about this a little bit. I don't know what the genetic programming it is, because it's the growth and development is badass. We start off as one cell. And then, you know, the genetic program knows to start differentiating into different endoderms, and you get the endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm, these dermal layers, and then you get the nervous system is like, you know, one neuron first, and then comes all the millions and millions of neurons, and like, you know, so if there was situation in utero maybe where there was sort of asymmetrical blood flow and oxygenation or what have you, that might have then triggered the genetic programming to create a different fiber type proportion in one side of the body versus another. And it could have been regional. I have no idea, but I could see where that would happen. I mean, if you experimentally, if you somehow could like divide a fetus. This sounds just horrible. I'm not suggesting anyone ever do this experiment, but you can imagine if somehow blood flow distribution could be much greater and delivery of all the things that are important for growth and development in the womb to one side of the body versus the other. You can imagine a very disproportionate, asymmetrical issue evolving because of that when the child is born or when the offspring finally makes it out of the womb, because everything could be changed, right? Anyway, there's epigenetic things that can happen to it. So that's a really cool question. All right, next one. Sorry, I rambled there off into infinity.
That's all right. Hey, if you're enjoying our show, let me ask you to please hit the like button. It doesn't cost you anything, and it definitely helps us out. Leave us a comment. We love to hear what you think. And if you're new here, let me encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. We have lots of bodybuilding education and entertainment coming out each week. The bell will let you know when new stuff comes out. Hey, check this comment out. I don't know if you heard about this yet. If you had not heard, Justin Harris gave a big shout out to Scott Stevenson during his interview with Generation Iron. Justin said Scott Stevenson was one of the top 3 coaches he knows.
That's awesome.
That's really cool, man. I'm glad to hear that. I love hearing stuff like that when people can recognize you.
Yeah. Yeah. He just likes another old guy like me. He's got to keep some old guys, right? That's cool. I'll have to watch that and see. I'm interested to see who the other people are too.
Yeah. I'm curious to know as well. Who does he put you in company with?
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Thanks for letting me know. I'll look that up.
Yeah, Justin was on a little while ago, and he told us that they were going to be doing that. So it sounds like it's happening. Sometimes you hear like, oh, there's this big project happening, and then you never see it. So I'm glad to hear that it's actually coming to fruition.
I miss stuff sometimes because I'm limiting myself to German stuff as much as I can. So, but the translation, the dubbing has gotten crazy. Now you can do dubbing. I think I may have told you this. Like autoplay on YouTube started playing a video from a guy, Bikes and Beards. He's hilarious.
Okay.
Not only were his titles in German, but he was being dubbed in German.
I've seen that, man.
With a cloned voice.
I've seen that. It is so weird, but it's
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a program. This is it's your best accent or something like that, and they clone your voice. I did the trial run.
Okay.
I read something in English for about a minute, and then it created a cloned version of my voice speaking perfect accent-free German.
Holy crap.
And it took like only 1 minute. So you can do this, like your voice could be cloned easily from the things you've said thus far. You could be speaking Czech, Chinese,
That's
whatever.
actually, man, not a bad idea, because there's, like, say, for instance, a huge Spanish-speaking group of bodybuilders out there that would love to have more content that they could consume. You know what I'm saying? Or, any other place in the world.
There was someone who shan't be named who was doing that with his online content.
Oh, yeah.
And he was putting it in various languages.
It's not a bad idea.
You can even do the video. You can tell the mouth movements don't really look realistic. I mean, the AI stuff is just getting out of control, but that's a pretty cool way to get your information out.
Yeah,
I think the translations are good too.
I agree.
Yeah.
What about this one? Okay. First of all, he said, yes, I've been waiting for this episode with Scott. It was the last one that we put out. He says, can you ask him, should you lower your calories on a cruise to prevent fat gain, or eat the same calories to maintain muscle that you would while bulking? So
this would be like I took the term cruise for fortitude training intensive cruise, so I think he might mean fortitude training intensive cruise, but Dante has his own way of doing cruises, and I won't try to say what he would say necessarily, but so the cruise is a deload. And the way I set up the intensive cruises, and this is something the person would figure out what works for them eventually, but the way I set them up is to be a taper where you could potentially, the idea is that you would, after the deload, come back stronger and potentially also have more muscle, have accrued muscle mass. You're not going to just blow up, 10 kilos of muscle or whatever in a couple weeks. But then you would also have recovered, and if there is any rebound muscle growth that would occur, that would also have happened during that time. So That being the idea, if you're using Fortitude Training, you're in off season, you're trying to gain muscle. So here's where it kind of gets interesting. So some people, if someone is, if they're one of those people who's sort of ectomorphic, so to speak, getting fat is an issue, gaining muscle mass is really their difficulty. There is a caloric need, there's a caloric demand for gaining new muscle tissue. And if someone has set themselves up where they've trained into where they're in a functional overreaching scenario, where after, in the course of that tapered intensive cruise deload, they are going to come back stronger and recovered better, you could be shortchanging yourself if you're not eating enough to allow that to happen. So one way to go about this would be someone who's like, quote unquote, hard gainer, is to say, hey, I'm not going to get fat. If I get fat, I know I can diet that off down the road.
Yeah.
But I want to use this cruise to make dang sure that I've got plenty of calories available to grow whatever muscle I possibly could. I'm going to be recovering, and especially in that scenario, you're going to come back feeling really good and really strong if you do the cruise properly. So it's always, this is it's a related topic, but it's one that always it pops in my head when people talk about caloric excess versus caloric deficit, right? So take this scenario, someone eats at 3,000 calories, they don't gain, they don't lose muscle mass, everything's the same. That's their caloric equivalency point, right? Nothing's going either direction. And then they add 500 calories, right? And let's say 200 calories of that goes to building muscle. So is their caloric excess 500 calories or is it 300 calories? Because only 300 calories would be stored as fat. And let's say then they go to 4,000 calories and now they get 500 calories stored as fat. But like, let's just say this is the way it works for them. The anabolic processes that are triggered by the caloric excess or the extra calories coming in drives muscle mass accrual in the way you want it to. So your extra 1,000 calories, it doesn't mean you've got 7,000 calories of caloric excess. You're not putting on a couple pounds of fat a week in that way.
Yeah.
It would hopefully be less. That depends on how long you've been training, how close you are to your genetic set point, if you're using PEDs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So take someone during that cruise period, back to the question, and if you say, well, I don't want to get fat during my cruise because I'm not training as much, my caloric expenditure is less, I'm going to eat less, you may actually be shooting yourself in the foot by not providing the calories that would allow you to have that functional overreaching in terms of muscle size. That's the whole point, the way I've set up Fortitude Training, of having the deload, is so that accrued fatigue and that stimulus that you haven't been able to reap during the blast, where you're progressively training, is now available for you because you take a step back in terms of your training. You still do train. I won't go through how a Fortitude Training intensive cruise works, but now you give everything available. This is kind of like what happens after shows. You can put on fat pretty fast after a show too, but people can gain muscle really, really quickly. Some of that's glycogen, blah, blah, blah. But I think there is a potential for gaining more muscle mass. Now, teasing out how much that is body composition wise is just like an impossibility because you're shifting your water. A lot of it's going to be fat for sure. It depends on if you're using PEDs. That's a whole different deal, right? Completely different situation really as far as what you can do, because you come out of a show, if you're a natural competitor, and your hormones are tanked, whereas you come out of a show, if you're an enhanced competitor, your hormones are maybe higher hormones, so to speak. Your drugs, your hormonally similar PEDs, your steroids are as higher as they've ever been, perhaps. Yeah. So you got a totally different situation in terms of the anabolic drive that comes from hormonal related mechanisms. So anyway, if you're someone who is using Fortitude Training and dieting down, so shifting gears now, then you might want to make sure you're just trying to hold on to strength. You're just trying to hold on to your muscle mass. You're knowing you're not going to gain any during your diet. If you know that, from everything you're doing, you're not expecting that. In that case, you might want to just go up to something closer to maintenance. Don't intentionally lose fat. Allow those extra calories to allow you to recover clear that fatigue out, so to speak, and then you start the next blast, and that's when you then create the caloric deficit, do all the things you need to do to drop more fat. So use the cruise in that case, just to allow for recovery, and then be careful with how many calories you eat so that you don't go backwards in terms of your fat, but have enough in there, your body fat, but have enough in there so that you can recover. So it's all situational as to what you do during that cruise and what your goals are, how far away from a show you are, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you could use a cruise during an off season when you're full blasting, where you're like, I need to drop my calories down because my GI needs the break, right? And I'll feel great. And you could then, if you could, even go from 5,000 to 4,000 calories and still have plenty of calories to allow you to grow, and just the recovery and the functional overreaching aspect of it could allow you to make progress, just because you're clearing the fatigue and you feel better and you still got enough calories there. So figuring out what works for you is the big picture thing here that's important. But the cruises can be all over. It's all totally individual as to how you do that. Yeah. I think, at least.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I assumed he meant like a steroid cruise. So while I was listening to you, go ahead. Yeah. While I was listening to you, I was thinking, well, how would this compare to that? And really, I could see a lot of the same things applying.
Yeah, I mean, the cruise. As to whether a steroid cruise, what that does for you, that's going to be situation specific too. So, I don't know. Let's take kind of a worst case scenario, and you're blasting orals in your off season, right?
Yeah.
And your liver's not happy, and IGF-1 output's low, and your appetite's all screwed up because of it. And you're getting all the negative side effects. Then having a cruise and coming off your orals, you're just clearing shit out. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's how you would do that. If you're on injectables, let's say, and if you're trying to restore your HPTA, it's like, I don't know how much you're going to really do that. I mean, that could be the time when you use HCG, which could help with testicular size, and maybe in the long run could help with fertility. But if you're going to use HCG for that purpose, it would make sense to just use it continually and don't let the testicles atrophy in the first place.
Yeah.
Keep that signal up and running continuously. So what a cruise does, I think a lot of it's just getting toxicity out, psychological break from all the, doing all the shots if you're someone who's doing a bunch of stuff. And whether you restore sensitivity during like a 2-week cruise, that's what I think of as a cruise,
Yeah.
That's difficult.
I think I was thinking along the lines of, you finished, say, an off-season bulk, and then what do you do with the food from there? And that's where I was saying, I feel like the food would be pretty, it would be very situation dependent, but I wouldn't necessarily want to just cut things back out. You know what I mean?
Not too hard. No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, theoretically, I said this before. If you're someone, let's say you're at 5,000 calories and you're not going anywhere. You've been there for a couple months, right? And you have some you have reasons, adaptive mechanisms that are involved with why you're not, your body weight, your body fat, muscle mass, everything staying the same. And then you just go, okay, I'm going to just stop force feeding myself, keep my protein where it needs to be, and you drop to 3,500 calories or 4,000 calories. And if everything stays the same, and let's say your metabolism stays elevated at least for a few days after that, I think it's probably variable. I've looked in this before. The data don't show like a clear picture from what I recall, but someone correct me if I'm wrong here. I've seen some really bizarre stuff as far as what happens in terms of adaptation there. It's all over the place. But everything else stays the same. You're moving around, blah, blah, and you drop down by 1,000 calories a day. You're going to clear a lot of water off in most cases too. But you could conceivably, even though you're eating a large number of calories, because your whole system is running to balance out a caloric input of 5,000 calories, and now you drop it down 1,000 calories, you could conceivably lose a couple pounds of fat for a week or so, or be en route to losing. That's 1,000 calories a day. That's 7,000 calories a week. That's a couple pounds of fat. So that might happen over the next, even if there's some adaptation in those first days, you might lose a pound or two of fat, even though you're eating 4,000 calories and not even really hungry, because you've raised your calories up. This is the idea of building up that caloric intake during the off season. So then you have, like, if you're up to 7,000 calories during the off season, and you're big enough to handle that and you're moving around, and then you go down to 4,000 calories. Well, you drop your calories 3,000 per day, and you can potentially lose fat and dial it in. You hear the bigger guys that they don't get hungry at all. There's no hunger whatsoever. They just diet in. You know, they may be tired, but they don't really get hungry because they're eating so much.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, you can drop the calories down in that situation for sure, and actually lose some fat potentially.
If you're in the market for protein powder, check out TrueNutrition.com. They literally have like every protein powder under the sun. I go with their cold filtered whey isolate or their Team Skip blend. I prefer the chocolate peanut butter cup, but there's a few flavors that I like. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Victoria, my wife, she gets the pea protein isolate. It's rare to find a pea isolate. Most of them are concentrate, so the isolate is super low in carbs. Regardless of your diet, they will have a protein powder for you, and you get to flavor it how you want and buy it by how many pounds you want. So check them out, TrueNutrition.com. They're the first company that ever supported our podcasting, so we support them. You can support us by shopping with True Nutrition and using our code THINK.
All right, this is a term I've never heard of. It's in the live stream. Anorgasmic. Can it be possible to be anorgasmic on TRT?
Yeah, you can, for sure.
What does that term
mean?
mean?
You can't have an orgasm.
Oh, God. Yeah.
You don't want to be familiar with that, right?
Yeah, I don't want to know anything about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might be more complicated with women. I'm no expert here at all because there are women. This is a complaint that women have. At least I hear and read and talking to women. And
not the women I know, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, nobody I've ever been with.
Up high.
Right. They're begging me to stop. Not another orgasm, Scott. Not another one. Just leave me be for a little while. No way. Here we go. Just one more. So yeah, absolutely. The thing I saw this question when it popped up. Pardon the pun. On the chat is, yeah, obviously it is, like, pretty much everything's possible. The reason I mentioned women initially is that I think generally you could tend to say that women are intimacy is perhaps more of an emotional phenomenon, whereas men it may be more of a physical phenomenon. But that's just a broad. That doesn't mean that's the way for everyone, for sure. But so if someone is you can be psychological issues to why someone can't have an orgasm, why someone can't come. So that could possibly happen if someone's sex drive or sexual inclinations change when they go from hypogonadal to a eugonadal state, so they're on TRT, right? I wouldn't expect that, but the thing that is interesting, I kind of found over the years, is that one thing that does seem to help with sex drive, which would be related then, that's the more obvious connection, is you have poor sex drive, and you're just not sexually aroused, so you don't have an orgasm, is restoring. See, TRT is not hormone replacement in the complete sense. It's just testosterone.
Yeah. So
you're missing the gonadotrophins. So HCG does have some FSH-like actions, but when people use HCG, men thinking here, that can restore sex drive for them. So I think there's some things going on up in the brain where the brain is sensing in terms of sex drive and the neurological dynamics of having an orgasm and everything that's involved there. It's sensing. This would make sense because we have multiple redundancies in our hormonal axes. It's sensing the lack of the gonadotrophins. It's really kind of a bizarre thing because you can have primary or secondary hypogonadism, where primary is the testes aren't producing testosterone. Secondary is that you don't have the signal coming from the gonadotrophins. You also have a problem with hypothalamus connecting with pituitary as well. That each of those places along the axis could be involved.
Yeah.
But when you just put testosterone in, And this happens like with guys when they go on a cycle, for instance, first time. Their sex drive is sky high, and then after they've been on for 6 months or a year, they don't have the sex drive the way they used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's related necessarily to a lack of gonadotrophins. It could be that there's some sort of a downregulation or a dysregulation. Otherwise, because you're just replacing testosterone, you're not replacing the entire axis. So we just think, the gonadotrophins, all they do is tell the testes to produce sperm or to produce testosterone. But those are also feeding back. They have feedback mechanisms in the brain to keep the whole axis up and running. So it makes total sense to me. And this is what seems to suggest when people use HCG, guys use HCG, their sex drive will come back, and they notice this. So if you're on TRT, most people get their blood drawn, and they may have like nothing. There's no LH there at all. It's Zippo. It's gone.
Yeah.
So they completely feedback inhibited with the testosterone and potentially estrogen if they don't have that under control.
Yeah, I was going to add estrogen. If estrogen is too high or too low, we're assuming when we say TRT, we're assuming he's on legit TRT, and maybe he is. But I would, I don't know if he's looked at estrogen, but if that's out of range, that could definitely, lead to some issues too.
Yeah, that's the other huge one. If it's too low, too high, makes a huge difference.
And I found even when you wouldn't think this, the more free test, the better, right? But I found that I start having libido issues if my SHBG gets too low.
Mm-hmm. And your free test is too high.
Yeah. But you would think oh man, more free test, the better, right? But if it gets too low, then I start having libido issues. And I've seen people tell me they had this issue and I'm just throwing things, like if you're going to throw things at the wall and see if it sticks, DHEA, possibly, if that's, because like you said, we're talking test replacement, not hormone replacement. And if your DHEA isn't where you want it to be, maybe that's a consideration too.
All the metabolites of testosterone synthesis. I mean, people they can check out Vigorous Steve's videos on neurosteroids, DHEA. I think he maybe uses pregnenolone.
He does, I think, yeah. And that's been something more popular lately.
Yeah, that I've known women who have used pregnenolone when they're becoming perimenopausal.
Yeah,
just to sort of feed into the steroid hormone synthesis pathways, and that's sort of I think they call it like the master steroid hormone or something like that. I've seen that word used for pregnenolone because it's the precursor for all the different pathways into the steroid hormones.
I don't think Victoria's a big fan of it.
I would defer to her 100%.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to quote her on this, but I thought she had said that there's no actual efficacy, like it hasn't really been shown to do what we think it's going to do, but don't quote me on that, you know what I mean? I'd have to drag her out of her office.
It could be a placebo effect,
Hey, mental is a huge aspect, right?
Absolutely. I think there's probably variability. I think we covered this here, looking at the various genes that are involved with tamoxifen, Novaldex metabolism. And it's in my, I use it as example in that are all steroids equal video that we did it here in the podcast. That presentation I gave,
that was great
5-6 months ago.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, it was, and that was an example of something that's been studied quite a bit because of its use in treating cancer. And there's so many genes that are involved in their metabolism there. So, if you just throw pregnenolone in and say, okay, now do what I want you to do, like, feed into this highly complex pathway with literally variability at every enzymatic step along the way.
Yeah.
On average, heck, I can believe that there'd be Zippo efficacy because some people could work the opposite. Like in some cases with Novaldex, estrogen levels were going up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people, yeah. So that's why, anecdotal evidence, it worked for some people that I've known, but all in all, totally see where it wouldn't work. It could actually backfire for some people too. I could see. So, yeah, so there's neurosteroid possibilities there. There's you're lacking the gonadotrophins. Your estrogen levels are too high or too low. So those are some avenues that this person could check out to see if that's what's going on there, and then just psychological. You know, I mean, I'm no sex therapist, but I play one online right today for this question. But I wonder too, you know, if it's not something that couldn't be practiced. So, you know, masturbate. There are people, women and men, who can orgasm by themselves, but they have an intimacy issue, or they don't feel comfortable, or what have you. So is this anorgasmic situation one that happens with the partner, or one that happens all the time? The person has normal sex drive or even high sex drive, but they just can't have an orgasm. And I don't know the details, but I've seen people make associations between, I mean, the parasympathetic nervous system in men is responsible for the increased blood flow. There's a relaxation there that involves the parasympathetic drive, and then at the orgasm, I believe there's a sympathetic drive there as well. So there's a balance in your autonomic nervous system that allows you to both become sexually aroused, or at least physically have the erection that a man would need to have intercourse, unless you've got some kind of implant or something in there. And then there's different physiology involved with the orgasm itself. So, you know, like people who take ephedrine sometimes have problems getting hard-ons. Right? And I know there are drugs where people can't come if they take the drugs. You go on like Professional Muscle, and people talk about, this is not TRT, but trenbolone makes them crazy horny. This is one of the ones really crazy. Some people think it just makes them crazy horny, and some people it just totally shuts them down. Yeah. And some people talk about certain drugs. There's Decadic, of course, has its issues, and certain drugs cause some people to be anorgasmic. They can go, you know, the guys will say, I can go for days, right? Yeah. But I can't seem to come. Right, which, you know, is frustrating. Of course, like, okay, good. I've proved I'm a stallion, but now it's time to finish the race, and I can't do it. Damn it. Yeah. Right. So there's a polypharmacy issue that could be investigated here too. It's might not be the TRT. It could be something else. Yeah. That was started along with the TRT, or it could be the interaction between these factors and something that we don't know about. Because this is just, you know. The question is yes. Is it possible? Yes. Yes. Yeah, but the reason why is the real question.
How about this one? As always, another great episode. I have a training question for Stevenson. Just Stevenson, which I hope can be answered and addressed.
Sounds like my wrestling coach.
Yeah. Stevenson, I got a question for you.
Push-ups.
Okay, so just today I trained legs and delts, and I first did leg press and then went to leg extensions and did my first triple drop cycle, working each drop to failure. I then rested a full 5 minutes before attempting my second triple drop cycle, and I could not get one freaking rep for the first set. WTF! I couldn't believe I was so trashed from the first triple drop cycle that I couldn't even do one rep with the same weight that I got 13 reps for to failure 5 minutes ago. So 2 or 3 of my leg extension drops were just let it be and call it a day on the leg work. On a side note, I found just doing straight sets to failure isn't enough for me to get maximum growth stimulation, and that I need to work harder than that for maximum growth situation. All best to you in 2025, and be sure to bust your ass in the gym.
Okay, so I thought about this was the first one you sent me today. I think you missed a sentence in there, but folks can read it. Okay, nah, it's all good. It doesn't really matter. So, there's a couple different levels that can look at this. One, what causes fatigue? Right? Why he did the triple drop set? He did leg presses. Don't know how much he did there, and then went to leg extensions. Did his first triple drop, and then rested 5 minutes, which you think would be enough to allow for metabolic fatigue to clear. Mm-hmm. But people talk about central fatigue. This is an oversimplification because it's usually multifactorial. But central fatigue, something going on in the brain or something psychological. So neurological in the central nervous system and or psychological. And then peripheral fatigue being something basically at the level of where the alpha motor neurons innervate the fibers, the motor units, and then anything going on in the muscles themselves. So damage to the muscle, excitation, contraction, coupling, failure, all the things that can cause fatigue and energy imbalance so that you can't do what you're trying to do in the gym. That would be like local muscle fatigue, basically. So it's hard to know what happened there. It's probably a number of things. It could have been like, I'm guessing this was the first time that he did this workout, and I'm saying that because he obviously didn't work up to it, or he hadn't done it before. Otherwise, he'd have known he couldn't do any reps on the second. So that triple drop set might have introduced a massive amount of fatigue and or damage in a way that he never had before. So he may have literally had some part of initiating muscle damage is literally the insult that happens right away. So you get some streaming of the myofibrils, and you get some misalignment of the actin and myosin. So there's an impairment at the level of the muscle. But you can also get an impairment in the brain where you just can't activate the muscle the same way. And that could be substantial. It could be 10, 15% if you really went for it. So that's just from a fatigue standpoint. If he's able to do 13 reps, I mean, that's maybe 75%, 80% of his 1 rep max. It's hard to say, maybe 70. It's it differs. We would know for him. Could be fiber types. The various things dictate what percentage of a 1 rep max you could do for 13 reps. So he may have actually lost strength on a 1RM or truly lost strength muscularly and neurologically 10-15%. So that 1RM that it say was 75%, now that's now become like 90% of his 1RM, that same weight, right? You think he should be able to get some reps. One thing I thought about is if he was like using the whole stack. Sometimes machines get stuck. They just stick. I've had this happen before. Like, what the hell's going on? And then once you get it moving, it's fine, but it sticks. So I don't know what that first rep attempt looked like. Did it not move at all, right? Or did he push it up? It's also, there's a strength curve for knee extensions, and there's the loading curve of the machine. And some machines who have full range of motion, they're hard to get going at the beginning. So if he went in like balls to the wall on that first set, and he was plenty strong to get the weight going, and he was moving it pretty, almost ballistically, getting a stretch shortening cycle, which is more efficient. You can see when people are doing when their reps are slow and controlled, and the transitions are metered between the concentric and the eccentric and vice versa, you will see that they get those grinder reps, right? And when you start doing, kind of throwing the weight around, you will come to a grinding halt at the end of your set in a totally different way. I've seen this because I've done it, where I've just like been so hyped up and I just blasted in the set. I'm like, I'm going to get reps and beat the logbook. So it may have been that 13 reps was a little bit inflated, right? Because he got the weight going and then he was just moving it around and just going to town. And maybe that was more like an 8 or 9 rep set if he'd been doing it in a controlled fashion. So then he comes back 5 minutes later. He's in this fatigue state, central fatigue, peripheral fatigue, and he's actually literally got the hardest part of the rep is in the lengthened position where the muscle isn't as strong, or biomechanically you're not as strong. So knee extensions at about 60% knee flexion is where you have the greatest torque production. That's at least on average. Maybe for him, his knee architecture, his muscle length, everything else, maybe he's even especially weak in the lengthened position. Maybe this was a good leg press. I like the ones that really get you into a good stretch. So he's got a leg press that put him in a lengthened position where he's not strong personally, and biomechanically it's just one that overloads. Maybe it's a cam, the Nautilus style thing, so it's making it even more difficult. So he just couldn't get the weight going. One thing you can do on that, if you find that to be the case, is you just let your butt come off the seat so your legs are straighter. You're not so flexed at the knees.
Yeah.
And then you use your body as a counterweight, and you lay down and get the thing going, and then you can.
Yeah.
First, what I'm talking about.
I sure do.
Kind of, so he could have done that, but so it would make sense potentially that for those reasons. So that's just like everything I'm listening. The other thing is, this sounds like the triple drop sets will whack the hell out of you. I wouldn't be surprised I'm not like trying to cast aspersions, but it may have been like that he didn't have the same psychological state for that second round as he did for the first one. He just wasn't ready to get after it. He wasn't expecting that. Like, it sounds like he's like, what the hell happened? A story popped in my head when you sent me this question today. There was a dude back at the Powerhouse North on Nebraska in Tampa. Shout out to anyone who's at the gym there who might actually possibly hear this. Like, blue collar gym, love that place, man. It was the place I trained at the most when I was back in Tampa. And this guy used to come in. I don't even remember his name. Nick Wary would know his name. I can't remember his name right now, but I walked in and did my workout. I was there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe, and he was over on the deadlift platform. The thing loaded up with, I don't know, like 490, about 500 pounds, something like that, which is a hell of a deadlift for a guy this size. And I saw him try it. He couldn't get it a couple times, and he was frustrated. And then I went and did stuff, and I came back, and I come back to the gym, and I'm smelling McDonald's, right? He went and got some McDonald's. He's eating McDonald's, and I actually talked to him when I was packing up my stuff. I'm like, man, you're going to get that weight, aren't you? He's like, I'm getting that shit, man. He said, no way he's leaving the gym until he does that. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to rest. I'm going to have some food. And he just went to wherever was closest, right? Or maybe that's his power food. I don't know. But he went
McDonald's to get more reps with it.
Yeah, right. So, but he was damned determined to get that deadlift that day.
Yeah.
So in this case, like, he said, he just didn't do it. He was done, and he just walked away and went to his delt training. But if he'd have said, you know what, I'm going to go out to my car, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to play some Anthrax or whatever does it to me, I'm going to become a friggin' monster, and gravity's about to be my bitch, motherfucker, and I'm going to go in there, I'm going to move that leg press or leg extension.
Yeah.
I bet he could have done it if he gave himself some more time and got himself psyched up.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably a psychological component there because I think he could have moved it. So the other question then, his question was, should I do my delt training, then go back and do another cycle or two of leg extension drop sets and let it be, or call it a day after on the leg work? So you can do that. You can go back and forth between upper and lower body training, that kind of thing. What that question suggests to me is that he kind of decided, it looks like from other things he said, straight sets to failure isn't enough for him to get maximal growth stimulation. Somehow he knows that, and this was the first time that he had tried the triple drop set approach and doing two of them, and it didn't work. So then he just bailed on the second one because he couldn't get a single rep. So I'm guessing that he may have bitten off more than he could chew for this, and he wasn't trying to get the most from the least. So he maybe went from doing straight sets to failure, and then he's like, I'm going to just do 2 triple drop sets, and it was more difficult than he thought it was going to be, and then he didn't follow through. So maybe the best step now might be to, look at what he was doing before and then add a single triple drop set at the end.
Yeah.
So because one thing that people are concerned about, and this makes sense, is like if you do a bunch of fatiguing shit, like you do your light fatiguing sets at the beginning, then you limit the heavy weights that you can lift later on in the workout. So you're missing the loading that can happen there, and then also you're not practicing the heavy lifts in a way that's going to allow you to lift heavier and then have progressive overload occurring in the higher weight, lower rep ranges.
Yeah.
So he might shift back to something intermediate between what he was doing and then the triple drop set, and then go from there, and then eventually maybe he needs more triple drop sets. But it sounds like he just kind of, I don't say he threw the baby out with the bathwater, but he just went from straight sets to I'm going to do triple drop sets, and it was too much. So that's really fascinating, though, that he couldn't get that. I bet now, after hearing this, DJ James, if he does that triple drops, he's going to get it. I would love to hear him come back and say, I did that shit again, and I was so rip-roaring ready to go. I got 15 reps on the second one, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much there. There's so much there in our psyches, that make a difference. And he was not used to, I guess, the amount of fatigue from whatever sources that can come from triple drop sets, because he apparently had done a lot of those. And those do really drop you down a notch. When you hit triple
yeah.
failure like that, those will substantially reduce. I mean, you're dropping your loads down by 15-20% after that, potentially, which is matches close to what it suggests his fatigue actually was. So anyway, that's a great question.
I like
I'm
that
glad
too.
Yeah.
I like that too. We had a bunch of stuff coming up in the stream too. We talked about Scott. I got to tell you, man. A couple episodes ago, you had what I consider to be one of my all-time favorite analogies when we were talking about solidifying the gains and basically building the infrastructure within the muscle. Just like a city that's expanding isn't going to put post offices out in the country in order to plan for the suburbs to expand. They're going to use the post offices that they already have, right? And as the city expands and the post offices are overwhelmed, then they'll put in new post offices, just like your new muscle cells will eventually adapt and build new infrastructure or improved infrastructure by adding post offices
in the cells. Yeah, the nuclei on the satellite cells. Yep. Go ahead,
in the satellite cells. So, building off of that, what would be a sufficient amount of time to solidify the gains?
That's an unknown question, or unknown. Yeah, there's
This is Bill, by the way, client of mine.
Okay.
When we first started working together, Scott, and this was a couple years ago, he was about 200 pounds. Today, he's 307 with abs. All right.
Wow.
He
doesn't need this question answered. He's got he's good.
Well, we broke 300 together, working together now, and whether we work together or not, he would have done it, But it's fun to get back with him. He took some time to do his own thing, and we're working together again, and we're up at 307, 308, and he's just now starting to feel uncomfortable. But we didn't break 300 that long ago, and we've been on what's that?
How tall is he? Sorry.
He's a taller guy. I can't remember how tall you are, Bill, but I'm going to say over 5'10". He's a taller guy.
Okay, it's still not that tall. All right. He's not 6'4".
No, he's not 6'4", but we just hit that 307 pounds mark. I don't want him, and he's just now starting to feel uncomfortable. He didn't have any cardio, so we're doing things to now get him more comfortable at this weight. But I don't want to pull back just yet. I want to give him time here. So now, so I see where he's coming from, and I shared your analogy with him, which he was like, "Oh man, that is so good." It is such a good analogy. You can really visualize it. So that's the background on where he's at with this.
That's where he's coming from. So I mean, if you're just looking at the studies, of course they're not very long term, but it's a matter of months when when they're documenting the satellite cell thing that was what the analogy was about, where you're getting more satellite cells. So that you can see that in 8 weeks. But those are not studies with people that have done what he has done. Right? Those are not people who have been training for years, right? But it does suggest to some degree, it takes some time for the satellite cells to set up at residency as new nuclei, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that aspect. There's also what I think is important to solidifying the gains is not just that, but also that you get used so that it becomes almost an everyday occurrence that you're using the training loads that you've just reached. Right? So like let's say at that weight, like he's probably squatting 6 plates if he's doing barbell squats, or 5 plates for reps.
He's strong.
I'm guessing.
He's strong and maniacal. Like if you're his training, you would give him you'd give him 2 thumbs up.
Friggin' badass. So I would say hold that weight. At least 3 months is sort of the bro answer. 2 or 3 months before you'd want to diet down. And I think the idea would be just psychologically, this is sort of a feeling sense that he would get. Is like he's going in and like now let's say he's squatting 5 plates for 12 reps.
Okay.
Right, deep. And he just started doing that in the last 6 months. Right, and he's there, and now you guys decide you're not going to push things, just going to stick there. He does that 6 or 7 times over the course of the next 3 months. He's rotating through. That exercise comes up every once in a while, and he knows he can get 12 reps. If he then and you guys have dieted down before, he's dieted down, probably never from this weight, but he's done a contest diet in the past.
He never has.
Never has. Okay.
He
All
never
right. So he
has.
doesn't quite know. So that's a good question. You know, this can help guide how fast you diet yourself. I'm not trying to tell you how to coach your client, but this is one thing you could, I think is important, is holding on to your strength. If you can keep your strength when you diet down, then you're going to keep a good part of your size. And I'm not talking about 1 RM strength. No one's measuring that. But keep your training loads the same. This is why I'm dance with the one who brung you. That's what I always say in this situation. I stole that from Dante.
Yeah.
So if he gets to the point where he feels like he's pretty sure you could guesstimate, he says he's got abs right now, so he might be 250 on stage.
Yeah, it's hard to say. That. And you know what? I'll throw something else in. He has a really unique way of storing fluid. I'll just call it fluid. Like we can hold and this
Camelback he carries around, or
exactly, in his muscles. Yeah. It's interesting.
Okay.
Even since he was lighter, even since he was at that 200 mark, you can push like just a shit ton of water into them, and it stores where we want it to. He can look like 20 pounds different in fluid alone when done right. Like, and it's interesting. Being obviously, Scott, I've seen a lot of people at this point. He has a unique way of storing fluid. It's different than a lot of people I've worked with before.
Okay.
Meaning, too, I think it could be tricky to his benefit or to his demise when we do diet him down and load him. You know what I mean? He could be two completely different guys dieted down, I think.
Well, he's not going to make, he's going to be an open super heavy.
Oh,
no
yeah.
What,
yeah, scale isn't going to be the concern.
Yeah.
But I mean the fullness to the muscle. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it can be, I think it could be radically different within a short period of time.
Oh, yeah. Definitely practice run on a peak week or loading and that kind of stuff. Well, the reason I asked that is that without having that experience of knowing how he feels and if he tends to lose strength during his diet, some people, it depends on PED usage is one thing, or just they know how to auto-regulate and reduce their training volume is the main thing that I like to do, and try to keep those loads. He may know that, if he can hold on to strength really well and maybe only, have to drop his weights down 5%. So if he's at the point where it's just a day at the office to go and move the weights that he's just attained in gaining this new size, and he's got intuitive sense of that, which he would have from the diet, which he hasn't yet done, so he doesn't know. But if he feels like, I think I could probably, this has gotten where I can do this, and I could drop those 50 pounds and get into shape, doesn't know until he does it. That is kind of a telltale sign. So I think this hasn't been studied, that I know of, but even how you're supposed to train when you diet down, like the diet people down, who've gained, like that situation of dieting in after an off season is basically unstudied. You just do the diet part in the studies, right?
Yeah.
But if he were to have a sense, I think I could keep this. I can keep the strength on my major lifts, the ones that are really the telltale signs of the muscle I have, the strength that I have. Then he's going to have those gains solidified. If it's still a tenuous thing, and I mean some of that is, and you and I have talked about this a multitude of times. Some of that is, the first time you do that set at 12 with 495 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those last couple reps are a little bit iffy. The depth might not have been perfect, but it's like, we'll count that. That was sort of like you got kind of a yellow light on that one, maybe a little bit. And now he's where like those are 12 solid reps, and he's like, almost able to pause on the last rep, and then he's got that weight that he owns that shit. And as long as he can still own it when he diets down, then he's going to keep the muscle mass.
Yeah.
So I think and some of that's psychological, like from the last question. If you know that weight is yours. And you're not scared of it anymore, and that bitch is your gimp in the box when you go into the gym, right?
Yeah,
it's yours, baby, and you're holding on to that no matter what. And you're come hell or high water, do or die, you're gonna get that 10 or 12 reps with 495 because that's yours all the way down until maybe 2 or 3 weeks out when it's silly to do those sorts of things anymore. you're going to keep that muscle mass. But so wait until he has the sense that he's got the gimp in the box.
Yeah. And I think part of it too that I noticed, one thing I would have done different, Scott, was when I was at my heaviest, I was very uncomfortable. Just trying to put my seatbelt on at times. I remember like having to go like, to try to reach around to get it, tying your shoes, all that stuff.
Right.
One thing when we started working together is he wasn't doing cardio, and I'm getting cardio into the plan now, and we're not going crazy with it because I think it would be too much to like, but his cardio isn't as good as it could be right now. So the first thing we're really trying to work on is holding where he's at and trying to improve his cardio. And the guy I always think of is Dave Smith. Dave Smith is like a freaking like silverback. You know what I mean? He's got all that muscle. You could do a backflip basically. And the more athletic you are at a heavier weight, I've just found the easier it is to hold versus if you're trying to struggle to put your seatbelt on, your body's going to want to get rid of that a lot faster.
Yeah. So you got to take your time with the diet. Look, someone chimed in 6'2"?
Okay, is that him?
I don't know.
Yep, that's him. He's 6'2", so he is tall.
Yeah.
6'2".
So he's pretty tall, but still, that's still a big dude.
And he's
still going to be 250.
And it's a huge amount to have gained within a shorter period of time.
Yeah,
to go up 100 pounds.
So yeah, I mean the way it sounds like he's got good. You guys are doing probably almost everything perfectly right. So you can probably even repartition maybe, or I would just hold that for a while, let him get more comfortable, and depends on what shows he wants. If he wants to do a show this year,
he's in no rush. He's just in it for the experience right now.
Yeah,
and he doesn't know he's got to compete yet. Well, we'll see if it even happens. You know what I mean?
I won't tell him then. I won't mention the thing on a podcast or anywhere else.
There's no pressure either.
Yeah,
We'll see what happens. He just loves the experience. He's just in for it to do what he can.
Oh well, then he's just gonna solidify the gains. Like hold on to this for a year, and you guys could just like don't try to bring his weight up anymore. Just diet him down for a little while, and then
we're reaching the end of a cycle too. So that's kind of where we sit. So we're kind of, he's going to be coming off pretty soon, but he's just now starting to feel uncomfortable at this weight. So that's why we're kind of at the contemplation stage of it's going to be time to end things pretty soon. And then from there we'll see what happens. It's going to depend on how he responds too,
Yeah. I mean, this is pure theoretical stuff, but one of the things that the animal research shows, there's a human study didn't seem to pick up on this phenomenon, but it doesn't mean that it isn't the case for people, maybe on an individual basis, is that steroids do turn on satellite cell activity. So the idea would be that one of the unethical advantages, or the advantage you'd have from previous steroid use, is that you have accrued more satellite cells, and you have a muscle memory phenomenon, or potentially even because those tend to stick around for years. Once you have them, they stay. Seems so that even if you've been off for years, you accrued a supraphysiological number of satellite cells. So that, in the context of his question, would be, so if the satellite cells, bring it back to the first thing you mentioned, if the satellite cells are part of what is necessary for muscle growth, and part of their activation, their proliferation, their invagination into the cells and setting up shop as those mail stations, as the post offices, is driven by his PED use, then it might be worth it to keep that aspect, or have kept that aspect. Not saying he shouldn't come off if it needs to do that, but to keep that aspect there, hopefully, so that there is, with the idea of some permanency of those satellite cells. Once they are set up as resident, and you remove training and they stay, which is what seems to happen, that's good. Hopefully then, if part of the reason why there's so many there and they've set up their residency is in part at least due to the steroids, hopefully then if you remove the steroids, they stay.
Yeah.
But it might be that the longer you could stick with the driving force, the stimulus, the PED, the pharmacological stimulus for them being where they are, to make sure that they stay in place at least a couple months, the better. So you leave them there for a couple months and then remove in this case, we remove the training. This research suggests they stay. The question would be, would they stay if you remove the drugs, if that was part of the reason why they're in the first place? Hopefully they would, but I don't know. I don't know the mechanisms of why they stay in the first place. It makes sense that they would, but so that's another thing to think about, is that when the drugs are gone, the drugs were responsible for them being there potentially to a larger degree. The drugs are also there, supporting protein synthesis and all the things that make the muscle cells larger. And the drugs are also helping with strength together to some degree too. So they're allowing you to keep the tensile stimulus, the training stimulus in place.
Right.
So if you come off all that stuff after just getting there, he may not be able to keep those loads in place for 3 months before he would bring his weight down, just because he's going to get weaker.
Right, and that's where I think with gear, it's kind of like the 3 steps forward, 1 step back. You know what I mean? Like I'll expect it to come down some, but the more we can get out of it now, the more we can solidify it now, the better.
Yeah. So, So as far as like holding at this weight and holding at this strength, if he comes off, he may not be able to do that.
Yeah.
Which
I will expect
acceptable.
to some degree, some degree.
So my thought there would be then, if we assume that tension is the most important feature of the resistance exercise stimulus that produces muscle growth, and recovery, of course, is going to be diminished when he's no longer on, then a focus that I would think over the next 3 months, when maybe you try to keep his weight and his size high, without him, getting overly fat. Doesn't sound like as long as he's got a lot of room there, is to reduce the volume and focus on keeping those heavy sets heavy and keeping that in place. So at least he's maintained the training stimulus to allow those to solidify, so to speak, the gains as best he can without the recovery help from the drugs.
Hey, really quick, I know we're probably running long on the show here. But Alexandria has been with us for a long time, always on our live streams, and they had a comment. I'm 5 foot, 157 pounds, and when I do cardio, my heart rate spikes to 204 without really pushing hard. Is that something I should be concerned about and monitor, or is that normal?
There it is. How old? It's hard to know. How old is she?
I'm not sure, but I feel like 204 is really high.
She looks pretty young. If that's her, it looks like that's her and her partner. They're in the.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. I just had this conversation with someone. There's a really interesting article on all the equations, various equations that have been formulated using different populations as to what your max heart rate would be.
Okay.
Right. So it's 220 minus your age is the standard one they teach you.
Okay.
She's 33. So her max heart rate, according to that, would be, there it is, 33, would be 187, supposedly. But the standard deviation of that particular equation is like 10 beats per minute. So she might have a max heart rate. If she's an outlier, she might have a max heart rate that's, they've done studies with firefighters where they've measured their heart rate, like where they're standing on top of a burning building, and these are guys that are in their 30s and their heart rate's over 220.
Oh yeah,
because there's just the extreme situation. So that still seems pretty high. It's possible that she's an outlier. First thing I would do is, hopefully she's got insurance, she could do this, is go to her primary care provider and say, hey, can we get an EKG while I'm doing a grade exercise test?
Yeah.
And see that she's not. And the other question is, how is she measuring her heart rate? The heart rate watches, even the polar monitors. I had a polar monitor and I didn't trust it at all. I've gotten over the years, I've measured my heart rate at my wrist. Smart coach. There's a bunch of. Oh, that's another question. Okay, so hoping this was related to her question, but it doesn't always match up very well with what my heart rate is supposed to be. I posted a few years ago. I was training legs, and my watch told me I was probably around 50 at the time. So my max heart rate would supposedly be 170 if I were around average, and my heart rate was 204. Right? Now, it was beating fast. I don't know that it was that high though. So it could be that this is an artifact based on what she's MyZone heart monitor. So yeah, I don't know how well those. I haven't had good luck with heart rate monitors at all in my case.
Really, my watch and my Life Fitness treadmill give me about the same, so I kind of trust it based off of that.
Yeah. Have you confirmed it? Have you validated it by measuring it manually?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so that's a thing I would suggest doing.
Okay.
But I'm not going to suggest doing that until I would suggest you go see your doctor.
Yeah.
Watch this 204 too. So like, okay, her watch. So I don't know that I trust the monitors for everyone. I know that I'm an outlier. It doesn't seem like I get all sorts of weird stuff from my Oura Ring too, and my Oura Ring thinks I'm sleeping every time I drive. It tells me I had a nice nap. Like I drive somewhere, I drive over to Miami or up to Tampa or whatever, and it's like, oh, you had a nice nap. I'm like, I was driving the car because I'm just sitting still.
Yeah.
But it thinks, from the lack of movement that I was asleep.
Wild.
So, but it could be like if there is some arrhythmia in her heart that could be creating a kind of an artifact that these heart rate monitors pick up on as a normal beat.
I see. Yeah.
So that's my hypothesis why that might happen. I don't know that I have an arrhythmia. I don't think that I do, not to my knowledge. But I would check, do a manual count. If she can't get to her doctor, somebody's like, let's say the appointment is until next week, and she's going to exercise, and she's willing to take the risk. This would be totally up to her. You're welcome, Alexandria. But I would just measure it manually and see. But it's within the realm of possibility. But first thing I would think is the monitor has an artifact. You can check that out yourself, and then it's never a bad idea if everything's just super high. The other thing is, so there's the rating of perceived exertion. You can see this sometimes in old school gyms. So there's a 0 to 10 scale. This is the Borg scale. Gunnar Borg invented this years ago. That's the modified Borg scale, because people are used to 0 to 10, right? We rate so many things on a 0 to 10. But the original scale was 6 to 20. And that's because it was developed looking at college-age students who are about 20 years old. So their max heart rate is about 220 minus your age. They're 20 years old. It's about 200. And their resting heart rate, were active people. I think he's pretty sure he's Swedish. So these are young people who are active. So they have a resting heart rate of about 60. So 60 to 200 is their range from resting to max heart rate. They just made the scale between 6 to 20 because perceived exertion tracks very much so with heart rate. From at rest, your perceived exertion is minimal. So he just created the scale from 6 to 20 because there's such a strong correlation between RPE and your heart rate. He's like, we'll just do it that way.
Wow.
You can do it 0 to 10 too. Yeah. So the question related to that idea is that is she alarmed because she's getting this high reported heart rate from her heart rate monitors in her watch? It's like, oh shit, my heart rate's out of control. Or does she feel like she's got high rating of exertion? That high rating of perceived exertion would also be an indicator that her heart is actually beating at a very high rate, or maybe there's an arrhythmia. She can ask herself if she has palpitations. Palpitation is just a perceived skip beat, abnormal beat, heavy beat, bizarre beat. Anything doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually happening. It's just your perception would be considered a palpitation. And then they can confirm with an EKG that you do have an abnormal heart rhythm in some way, shape, or form. So if she wouldn't be psyched out or freaked out by exercise, that her perceived exertion is way beyond what it's supposed to be given what she's doing, that would suggest that her heart rate is probably okay, because that association between heart rate and perceived exertion, it may mean that the monitors are just giving her wacky numbers.
Yeah, but go to your doctor. That was the first thing you said, right? I like that idea.
I like that idea too. Yeah, for sure. Because then they could do just a resting EKG, and then they could do an exercise test and see. It would be please get back to us. I would love this stuff. Is super interesting to me. And she says it feels like an alien wants to pop out. like in the Alien movie. So yeah. So she can't be that old. She knows that those are old movies, man. So I mean, she's 33. Those are good movies. I'm glad she's watching those because that was a crazy scene when the alien popped out.
Yeah.
Of the person's stomach. So
hey, real quick too, Vacky had a question about carbohydrates. We just did look at the all the shows that we have in the Muscle Minds playlist, because we did an entire big thing about nutrient timing, and it'll answer your question far better than we could at the very tail end of the show. So let's wrap this thing up, Scott.
All right,
Get you along your way, get you riding your e-bike, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Not yet.
Thanks for hanging with us. And, of course, go to byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, or you can go to the link that I will have in the description where you can get a signed copy. Scott will send that to you. It's off of eBay, and 15% will go to the ASPCA. And, of course, check out truenutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there for great protein powders, and supplementsource.ca for Canadians. Thank you guys, everybody from Patreon. And leave us more questions for the next show. This was great. We had a bunch of listener questions today, Scott.
Yeah, this was cool. Thank you, everyone.
All right, guys, for another episode of Muscle Minds, we'll see you soon. Thank you, Scott.
Adios.